All right, I'll get started. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining our bi-monthly White Tulip Health Foundation Medical Forum Speaker Series. The topic of today's talk will be Financial Health for Physicians, presented by Dr. Chirag Shah. Dr. Shah is a retinal surgeon in Boston. He's an assistant professor of medicine. He's an assistant professor at Tufts University School of Medicine and a lecturer at Harvard Medical School. He teaches financial freedom RX at Harvard and 12 other medical schools. He co-authored a book of the same title, which serves as a financial planning guidebook for physicians throughout their careers. Before Dr. Shah gets started with his talk, I would like to let you know about a few points. The last 15 minutes of this talk will be dedicated to your questions. So if you come up with any questions throughout the talk, please post them on the live chat box on YouTube. At the end of the talk, I will direct them to Dr. Shah for him to answer. Dr. Shah, I would like to welcome you at this point and thank you in advance for agreeing to educate us on this very important topic.
Thank you so much for the invitation and for the kind introduction. So for the next 45 minutes or so, we'll be talking about financial health and financial literacy for physicians. I listed my email address on the title screen there. If any questions come up down the road, feel free to reach out. So let me just start with my disclaimers. Probably the most important is that I'm not a financial planner. I'm a retinal surgeon. And so if you need official financial advice, please consult your accountant or a financial planner or your tax attorney. I don't have any financial interest in this talk. I'm not paid to give this talk. I did write a book entitled Financial Freedom RX. All of the proceeds get donated to charity. I'm going to present materials that I wrote about in our book and also content that I give to 13 medical schools now. With the help of Harvard Medical School, I developed a curriculum on financial literacy that reaches several thousand medical students around the country. And this is a very brief synopsis of my course at those schools. This is just one approach. I'd encourage you to continue to educate yourself and to find an approach that works best for you. So there's several objectives over the next 45 minutes or so, and then we'll have some time afterwards for questions. I hope to teach you where to put your next dollar. I hope to teach you how to become financially independent if that's something that you want in an effort to achieve peace of mind. And the goal is really to allow your money to work harder than you do. And for folks who achieve financial independence, it allows them to practice medicine on their own terms for the satisfaction of caring for patients. And I would argue that financial security is a form of power. This is an outline of what we're going to be talking about. We'll talk about why financial planning matters, some of the steps you should consider taking as a young attending, some of the important insurances to set up early on in your career. And then we're going to dive into some of my most favorite topics, which include investing, both tax advantage and taxable investing, as well as diversification and asset allocation. And then we'll just end up talking about a few pitfalls to avoid, and that'll be it. So why are you guys here? Why are you guys listening to this lecture? And it's because doctors aren't rich. You know, I know there's this myth that doctors are rich, and maybe that was true during the heyday of medicine many years ago, but I don't know how true that is today. Physicians make on average about $300,000 a year, which is in the top 1% of all earners in the US, which would make you think that doctors are rich, but the majority have a net worth of less than $1 million, and about 40% have a net worth of less than $500,000. Why is it that doctors haven't accumulated that much wealth during their careers? Could it be because we receive very little formal education on finance? Could it be that we start our careers very late because of all the schooling and training that it takes, and we start with significant debt? You know, the average medical student will graduate with approximately $200,000 of debt. Is it because there are expectations in society to live up to a doctor's life and perhaps have a doctor's house and a doctor's car, and those things cost money? Or is it because of this concept of delayed gratification, which we all have learned in medical school? Does that lead to explosive spending once we earn a paycheck? I would argue that there's probably a component of all of these things for most doctors. Financial planning matters because unfortunately overhead only goes up, and so you end up working harder only to sort of tread water. And so it's important to try to plan early to grow your portfolio. Reimbursements often decrease over time. So as you can imagine, that margin gets more and more narrow as overhead goes up as well. There are many curveballs. We're in one right now with COVID and the pandemic, which could impact our professions. For some of us, it makes us busier. For some of us, makes us less busy. There are other curveballs that we've lived through, like stock market crashes, et cetera. And then, of course, life is expensive, and it seems to just get more expensive as you get older. Financial freedom will give you peace of mind. There are many things that couples argue about, and money is one of them. And it's nice if that can be something that you don't have to worry so much about, if you can get to a point where you do achieve financial independence. Wealth also buys you time. We're all racing against time. And as we know, time is pretty sacred in med school and in residency and as an attending. And so if you can pay someone to mow your lawn, for example, that might buy an extra hour or so of time to spend with your family. Just some ways that you can actually quote unquote buy time. Also, wealth gives you control. If you're no longer working for a paycheck, it allows you to maybe do more research, or maybe do more humanitarian work, or maybe just hang out more, depending on what you want to do. But it just allows you to control your time and your day. There's a really important concept that I like to start with, and that's the concept of enough. Enough means as much as necessary. And that can mean a lot of different things: having enough money, having enough time. But really, the most important thing about this concept of enough is that enough is absolute. It's not relative. So you need to think about what is enough for you in terms of a lifestyle, in terms of an income, in terms of the amount of time you want to spend doing things outside of work. Don't compare yourself to other people. There's no doubt you'll know people who make more money than you, who travel more than you, who do things more than you do. But don't compare yourself to the next person. Compare yourself to yourself. Enough is absolute. If you have enough for a happy life, if you make enough money to do the things you want to do, you might not be able to do everything, but if you're able to do most of the things you do, that's enough. And just remember that, because it's sometimes easy to forget that enough is absolute, and you start comparing yourself to others and you get disappointed. It's important to remember that this is very much a single player game. That's my son doing a Nordic ski race a few years ago. And, he's not racing against the other kids out there. He's just racing against himself. He just wants to beat his time from the last time. And so remember that it's a single player game, and that'll keep you happy and keep your head in the game if you're not comparing yourself to others. There are many financial goals that you should have, and there's going to be a different balance between all of these things for different individuals. Some of us may want to spend more time focusing on accumulating wealth, either for retirement or for legacy planning. Some just want to achieve financial independence early in life so they can retire. And I don't advocate for that. You've probably all heard of the FIRE movement, the financially independent retire early movement. I think that, if you love what you do and you've invested a lot of time and energy into becoming a doctor, it's sort of tragic, I think, to retire early. Unless that's what you want to do. But it is a relief to try to achieve financial independence. And then, of course, there's lifestyle. You can live pretty large if you want to. And all of us will have a different balance between all of these goals. And I think it's important that you sit down with your family, with your partner, and just talk about what your goals are and really have a written plan. And I'm hoping that you'll get some of the tools you'll need in this lecture to write a written plan and hopefully follow that throughout your careers. Financial planning definitely takes discipline. And I think every physician has discipline if you're able to get through med school and residency and beyond. Have a goal, write it down if you can't, keep it in your head, or keep it in your head if you can, and try to stick to it, stick to the plan. Especially during tumultuous markets like we're seeing right now, sticking to your plan will get you through, and most likely you will succeed on the other side. One important thing to remember, another important concept to remember, is this balance between offense and defense. When you're younger and you have more time on your hands, or you have a longer time horizon, I should say, not more time on your hands, but you have a longer time horizon until retirement, and you have a long, hopefully fruitful career ahead of you, you're going to want to be more offensive. And what that means is you're going to want to make money, and you're going to want to spend it. And as you get older, just like a soccer game, which is a tango between playing offense and playing defense, once you run up the score, offense is less important. You want to become more defensive. There is this balance. It's not necessarily linear as depicted here in this graph, but there is this balance of having some defenses in place early on, such as disability insurance, for example, and working hard, making money, saving a lot of money, and allowing that to compound throughout the course of your lifetime. But then becoming more defensive as you get older, and as you've hit whatever your numbers are that you want to hit for your portfolio. There are several principles that we're going to go over today. Probably the most important is to try to live below your means. And I'm going to go through some of the math behind that. But what that means is try to save 20% of your gross earnings. And we'll talk about why that 20% number is an important number to hit. As we've talked about, enough is absolute. Remember that when your partner or your colleague is, or your roommate from college is making a lot more than you. Just remember, it's absolute. If you make enough for yourself, then you're good. Have a budget, even as your income rises, hopefully over time. Continue to have a budget and continue to stick with it. What I encourage young physicians to do right after residency, and even during residency, is to pay off their debt. I think it's important to try to just crush that debt, within a few years after your residency or fellowship training. And then the same muscles, the same discipline that you'll use to pay off your debt, you will then use to grow your portfolio. Defense is very important. There are a few things that we'll talk about, such as disability insurance and life insurance. They become less important and probably not necessary once you achieve financial independence. And then we'll talk about how to maximize the tax advantage savings that Uncle Sam has set out for us, including 401ks and Roth 401ks. Try to save consistently. And what's nice is once you've paid yourself and you've saved what you need to save, you can spend the rest with impunity. Also try to maximize other tax advantage savings beyond your workplace savings accounts, like college savings accounts, like 529s, backdoor Roth IRAs. We're going to talk about what all this means. And then finally, one other really important principle that we'll talk about is dollar cost averaging. And you can do that by investing weekly or monthly the same amount. And when the market's up, you'll buy less. When the market's down, you'll buy more. And we'll go over that in greater detail. But these are some of the principles that I hope you walk away from this lecture with. So what are some of the initial steps to consider as a young attending? Because your strategy is going to change as you get older, and as your nest egg grows, you're going to want to become more defensive than offensive. But what happens when you're a young attending and you've just completed your residency? What I tell my fellows is to get it out of your system. And so we have this, I call it pent up delayed gratification. Spend some, don't spend it all, don't spend paycheck to paycheck, but spend X amount of money, a few $1,000s or up to $10,000, and get the things or do the things you always wanted, go on a trip, or, buy that expensive pair of jeans, or whatever it is you want. Just do whatever you want, get it out of your system, and then try to live below your means. And certainly I would encourage you to, early in your career, the first few years, try to live like a resident. I know that sounds painful to live like a resident when you're making more than a resident, but if you can live like a resident, pay off your debt, and get into the habit of saving money, you will really appreciate that in 10 and 20 years from now. I would encourage you to stick to a budget and make sure you're aware of what your whole household overhead is and what you're spending each year and on what. You don't have to get it down to to the exact dollar, but just have an idea. And I often will look at credit card statements or bank statements, and that'll kind of give me a sense of where our spending is going. And then, as I talked about earlier, and we'll go over in detail shortly, try to save at least 20% of your gross earnings. That's a really important number to hit. That'll put you on track to retire in your mid 60s. If you save less, then you're going to have to work longer. If you save more, then you'll achieve financial independence sooner. And the other thing to just consider is try not to flaunt your wealth. I know I told you that most doctors are not millionaires, but they still have a very high annual income on average. But try not to generate animosity by going overboard if you do end up accumulating a lot of wealth. It just makes it harder to connect with most people and your patients. So kind of the cornerstone and one of the tenets of this talk is that savings is important if you want to have money to invest and grow a portfolio. Without savings, there's nothing to play with. So I encourage you to stick to a budget. There are several online softwares that can help you stay on budget, or you can just kind of do just a very basic Excel spreadsheet. Try not to take out on credit card debt. I know that's sometimes hard to do when you're in residency. Oftentimes we do take on debt, but credit card debt is pretty expensive. I try to pay that off first before paying off your student debt. Remember that for the younger physicians on this call who are listening to this video, you have youth on your side, and there's significant power in compound interest. And compound interest is what I mean when I say time is money. You can turn that time into money just by compounding your savings. As mentioned, financial independence is freedom. That gives you a lot of peace by alleviating a lot of the stresses associated with finances. Definitely budget your annual spending as mentioned. And what I would encourage you to do is try to figure out when you hit 25 times your annual spending. Because once you hit that 25x of your annual spending, so let's say you spend $100,000 a year, once you've saved 2.5 million, you can draw 4% of that for 30 years. I often encourage people to save a little bit more, to save maybe 33 times their annual spending just to account for taxes, because taxes will get you. And that'll bring that 33x down to roughly 25x. But once you hit 25 to 33x your annual spending, you've hit it. You've hit your number. So that's how you'll know what your magic number is to achieve financial independence. And obviously, the less you spend every year, the less you need to save, and the more you spend every year, the more you need to save. Let's just go over the math a little bit. So let's just say that the average physician makes about $300,000 a year gross, and they're paying about 40% as an effective tax rate. And I'm going to talk about their real rate of return. So that's inflation adjusted. You might say, oh, my rate of return is 8% in the market, but you have to take into consideration inflation with that, not to mention taxes. And so if you save 20% of your annual salary, your annual gross salary, that would be $60,000 of a $300,000 salary. And then $120,000 would go to taxes, right? So that leaves you $120,000 in cash to spend as you wish. And if you invest that 20% savings, that $60,000, and if you start your career with $250,000 in debt, which is probably typical for most young physicians, and if you earn 4%, which is probably a good real rate of return after you adjust for inflation, in about 33 years, you'll hit financial independence. And so what that means that if you're graduating from residency at 33, you have $250,000 in debt, or let's say you're graduating at 30 from residency, then by the time you're 63, you're financially independent. So hopefully that 20% number kind of makes sense. And that's sort of the math behind it. And certainly if you have no debt, if you're fortunate you have no debt, then you'll have to only work for 28 years to achieve financial independence. Let's say you have a lot of debt, you'd have to work even more than 33 years. So you have to kind of do the math yourself to a certain degree. But if you save 20%, you're golden. You'll set yourself up to retire, hopefully in your mid 60s if you start working in your early 30s. Warren Buffett is one of my heroes, and one of the many wise things he has said is don't save what is left after spending, but rather spend what is left after saving. And that's what I would encourage you all to do, to sort of automate your savings. So that way it just leaves your checking account before you have an opportunity to spend it. And then whatever is left, you can spend as you wish. I mentioned budgeting a few times, and that really is the backbone of financial planning. There's several online softwares that you can use, like Quicken or Mint. And then, as I mentioned, use some of your credit card or bank statements as a starting point to kind of figure out your budgeting. As I also mentioned, try to live like a resident for the first few years after you graduate. And you can see kind of what that means. As a resident, let's say you're making $60,000 a year, and as a young attending, let's say you're making $200,000 a year. And if you continue to keep your overhead low, maybe you can live a little bit larger and spend a little bit more for rent, and maybe you can travel a little bit more. But if you don't really inflate your lifestyle too quickly, that allows you to put a lot more away in your 401k or your retirement account. But certainly a lot more towards loan repayment and also to savings. You could, potentially put $40,000 towards your loan repayment, and another $41,000 towards savings, just based on this example. And that's a big bump as a resident. And I'll tell you, it's a great day when you get to a net worth of zero. When all your debt is gone and you're finally worth nothing, it's pretty awesome, because then everything you save after that just allows you to go up. Let's talk quickly about some of the defensive strategies that are important, particularly early on in your careers. Offense wins games, but defense wins championships. A disability insurance is something that you want to get early in your career. And this is something that's pretty important for a physician, because you're protecting that very large educational and time investment that we all put in through med school and residency. As your income grows, you can increase your monthly benefit. And I'd recommend trying to get this early on in your career, hopefully as a resident if you can, because one, it's a little bit cheaper. Your annual premium will get a little bit more in terms of disability coverage. And two, hopefully you'll be healthy and there won't be any issues getting disability insurance early on in your life. There are certain things that can preclude you from getting disability insurance, like dangerous hobbies, including rock climbing. Remember that there's typically a 3-month waiting period before your disability insurance kicks in. And this just speaks to the importance of having sort of an emergency rainy day fund that funds your annual expenditures for 3 to 6 months. So that way, if you do get disabled, you have some cash that you can live off of until your disability kicks in. Remember that disability insurance only goes until the age of 65. And so you do have to put some of that disability benefit, if you are on disability, you have to put some of that disability benefit towards your retirement. So just kind of remember that, and try to grow your portfolio early. So that way it becomes less and less important if you do get disabled. And ultimately, once you achieve financial independence, you don't really need disability insurance anymore, and you can invest that money, the premium money. So there's a few riders I just want to quickly go over that I think are important. One is own occupation. That means that if you can't be a surgeon, let's say you're a surgeon, you can't do your job as a surgeon, but you can be a CEO of a pharmaceutical company, you still collect your disability benefit if something happens and you can't operate anymore. There are a handful of insurance companies, and I have no conflicts of interest here, that offer own occupation. Guardian, Mass Mutual, The Standard, those are a few examples, but I think there are a few others as well. Just make sure that your disability insurance company offers own occupation. I would encourage you to max it out early in your career. And then as you become financially independent, you can get rid of it if you'd like. Another important rider that isn't terribly expensive is called residual disability. So let's say you're partially disabled and you're able to work, half time or 3/4 time, then you'll get a proportion of your disability benefit. Guaranteed insurability is a rider that allows you to increase your coverage without having to undergo medical underwriting every time you want to increase. So every time you get a bump in your salary, you're able to increase the amount of coverage you have, but you just don't want to have to, as you get older, you don't want to have to undergo medical underwriting just in case a medical issue pops up and that makes it hard or impossible to get additional disability insurance. particularly when you're young, the cost of living adjustment is an inexpensive rider. So that way, if you do get disabled at a young age, your benefit increases with the cost of living, up until the age of 65. So that way it keeps up with the cost of living and with inflation. And then finally, and this is usually pretty standard, you want something that's non-cancelable and has a guaranteed renewal. So if your insurance company falls, they're required to sell your policy to another viable company. So that way it just keeps going until you're 65, and they can't cancel your policy, assuming that you pay your premiums on time. So that's disability insurance. I'd encourage you to get that early and to max it out until you're financially independent. Life insurance is another important thing to consider, particularly if you have a house or if you have a family. It basically protects your family against your death, because your family, I'm sure, is counting on your income. And if something happens and you pass prematurely, they get hopefully a certain amount of money to kind of get them through, maybe get the kids through college and pay for the house. I often encourage folks just to get cheap term life insurance. It's really inexpensive, particularly if you get it early. A lot of financial advisors will probably encourage you to get whole life insurance, which might have some advantage for older people just as a tax shelter. But I think for most people, it's pretty expensive with high fees. And so it probably doesn't work for most people, but maybe it does for some. But I think term life insurance is a really inexpensive, good way to go. One strategy is just to layer it. So you get one 10-year policy for $1 million, and then you get a 20-year policy for $1 million, and you get a 30-year policy for $1 million. And so that means as you get older and as your portfolio grows, you'll have less and less coverage. After 10 years, your 3 million in coverage goes down to 2 million. After 20 years, your 2 million goes down to 1 million. But that might be all you need, as you're getting older and as you're saving money and as you're investing. So it's just one strategy to kind of layer a few different term life insurance policies if you want. So it tapers off. Umbrella insurance is pretty inexpensive. And what this is extra personal liability insurance. And so if let's say you get into a car accident, someone gets hurt, or someone sues you for something outside of medical malpractice, this will help protect you from hopefully any out-of-pocket costs. It's pretty inexpensive. It allows you to, or it requires you rather, to max out your other insurances, like your homeowner's insurance and your car insurance. And then it adds, $1, $2, $3 million of coverage for personal liability. All right, so let's talk about some of the things that I really enjoy talking about. So the first thing we'll talk about some tax advantage investing. And so one of the mistakes that wealthy people often make is they tend to blow their wealth either on speculative investments or just excessive spending. And I encourage you to maybe, think twice before you do that. The other thing I'd encourage you is don't spend tomorrow's dollar. A lot of young people especially tend to spend money that haven't earned yet. And just remember that healthcare, unfortunately, is changing with private equity and with reduced reimbursements and increasing overhead. And so just don't bank on future earnings. Try to live with where you are now. Where do I put my next dollar? This is a question that I frequently get. And this isn't an exactly linear guide here, but it's close. And it's going to be different for different people and their situations. But oftentimes, if your employer provides a match to your workplace retirement plan, it's worth maximizing your workplace retirement because it's just free money that you're leaving on the table. If they match 10,000 of your 401k or 5,000, it's worth putting that much in just so you can get the match. I'd also encourage you to spend your early dollars getting rid of high interest loans, as we've talked about. And then, assuming you don't need too much liquidity, or if you have some liquid money, you can maximize your retirement plan contributions beyond the match to the limit. A backdoor Roth IRA, we'll talk about what that is in greater detail in just a moment, is a way to put away $6,000 into a Roth IRA, which grows tax-free. And when you take it out, there's no taxes on it. The Roth buckets are very nice in terms of avoiding taxes. You pay the taxes now, you don't pay them later. If you have children and if you plan on sending them to college, a 529 account is a good place to put some money. It grows tax-free, and it's it's not taxed if it's withdrawn for educational purposes, and then consider a taxable investing strategy once you've optimized these tax advantage buckets. We talked a little bit about compound interest, but that green graph shows you what happens if you put money away and it's compounded over 20 years. You can see just how much more money you have with compound interest. It's basically a snowball effect, as opposed to when you just gain interest without any compounding, or if you just shove money under your mattress. When you invest in tax deferred vehicles, such as a 401k, for example, or 529, you don't have to pay taxes each year. And so we call that tax drag. So in the absence of tax drag, you can see what happens to your portfolio. And this is why tax deferred vehicles like 401ks and Roth accounts are so desirable, because you don't have to pay taxes on it year to year. And then that money can just continue to compound and grow, as opposed to a taxable account. So really try to maximize your tax deferred vehicles as much as you can. Probably the most important tax deferred vehicle that we all will use is our workplace retirement plan, which is either a 401k or a 403b or a 457. As mentioned, there may be a partial match. I'd encourage you to hit that early if you can, and then try to hit the maximum when your salary allows, which was $20,500 for 2022. This is a tax-free contribution. So you're not taxed on this income, right? So the money goes in. You're not going to notice a $20,000 loss in your take home. You're going to notice probably a $12,000 loss in your take home in your paycheck, because it's a tax-free contribution. It grows tax deferred. But then in your retirement, you do have to pay taxes on it. But you may be in a lower tax bracket in retirement. So it all works out, and it has an opportunity to grow without that tax drag, as we talked about. For folks who think that they're always going to be in a higher tax bracket, consider a Roth 401k. This allows you to put in $20,500 that you've already paid taxes on. So it is right out of your paycheck, $20,500 after you've already paid taxes on it. But then it grows tax-free. And then when you take it out at the end, it's also never taxed again. The government just taxes it once. And so you take a little bit more of a hit early on out of your paycheck, but then it's a great thing to have in retirement. And this assumes that you think you're going to probably be in a similar tax bracket in retirement, just because of the investments that you've made throughout your career. Back to a Roth IRA, there's some question of whether that would go away this year, but so far we can still do this. It allows you to put $6,000 into a traditional Roth IRA and then immediately convert it to a traditional IRA rather, and then you can immediately transfer it through the back door into a Roth IRA. I know that sounds sort of illegal, doing something through the back door, but it's actually a legitimate way to put $6,000 away into a Roth account, in which case you've paid taxes on it already, and it'll grow tax-free. And at the end, in retirement, you can take it out without paying any taxes on it. A SEP IRA is something, just know that it exists. It's something for people who earn money as a consultant. So you have your regular job and you get paid on a W-2. But for folks who do consulting work, they would get paid as an independent contractor on something called a 1099 form. And if you do consulting work, it's nice to kind of set up your own separate retirement entity with your consulting income. You can do a SEP IRA. It's pretty simple to set up. However, it does complicate your ability to participate in a backdoor Roth IRA. So what I would encourage, if you truly want to try to maximize all of your tax advantage buckets, I would consider instead with your consultant money, putting it into a self-employed or a solo 401k. And this allows you to continue to participate in the backdoor Roth IRA. I'm not going to go into great detail about this here, but just know that this exists for those who do consulting work and get paid on a 1099 form. So I mentioned 529 plans. This is a way to save for college. You can gift up to $16,000 per person per child per year. And so if you're a couple and you have a child, you can give them $32,000 that you've already paid taxes on, and you can put that into a 529 account, and it grows tax deferred, and assuming that you take that money out for college or even for high school, for some private high school, then that money is never taxed. So it's a really great vehicle to save for college when you have children. And let's say your kid gets a scholarship to college, it is transferable to nieces and nephews and grandkids, or you can pay taxes on it and take the money out. So there's different ways to use that. Just briefly, a flexible spending account is a way to save some money pre-tax for healthcare or childcare expenses, and then you don't have to pay taxes on that money. So it kind of gets deducted from your account, and then you can kind of get that money back if you provide legitimate receipts for healthcare or childcare spending. It's just another way to save some money on taxes. It's a relatively small amount, but every dollar helps. All right, so taxable investing. Let's say you've exhausted your tax advantage investing vehicles, and now you have some money left, and you're ready to do some taxable investing. Or let's just say that you want to keep some money liquid for a down payment on a house, or just to have some money liquid. Then the vehicles I mentioned earlier, they're not terribly liquid. You can't just take money out of a 401k very easily without paying a penalty, unless you're of retirement age. But taxable investing allows you to be very liquid when needed. So one of the biggest investments that we'll all make will be most likely a house, if you end up being a homeowner. I encourage folks to own a home. I think it's in general a good investment compared to renting for the rest of your life. Certainly it's okay to rent during your training and when you're not sure where you're going to settle. When you do decide to buy a home, one thing that is worth considering is considering a 15-year fixed rate mortgage as opposed to the more traditional 30-year mortgage. And you can see in this graph that when you get a 15-year fixed rate mortgage, the first thing is that your interest rate is going to be lower than a 30-year fix, which is great. And then because interest is amortized and you're paying so much of your interest early on, you're just paying a lot more in interest. In this example of a $200,000 loan with a 30-year mortgage, you end up paying $333,000 to pay back that loan over 30 years. Whereas if you get a 15-year loan, you're only paying $252,000. So it's just a significant savings in interest. And the other kind of nice thing is that once your loan is paid off in 15 years, you're like, great, I don't have a mortgage anymore. I can just spend that money now. So just something to think about. Think about the 15-year mortgage if you can afford that. The rule of 72 means it's just an important mathematical thing to keep in the back of your head. It just what that rule is, it's the number of years it takes to double your money. So let's just say that you're earning 7.2% a year in interest, then it'll take you 10 years to double your money. So just kind of keep that in mind. And this just plays into that compound interest graph I showed you earlier, that the earlier you invest and the more time it has to grow and double and quadruple, the better. And that's the snowball effect that is just the wonderful thing about compound interest. So dollar cost averaging is a really, really important concept to know and to learn. And what that means is that you're injecting a certain amount of money into the market or into your savings let's say every month at a fixed interval. And as I mentioned previously, if the market is up, you're going to be buying less. And if the market's down, you're going to be buying more. And the nice thing about dollar cost averaging is when you're investing in a volatile market, and this is an example from 2008 to 2012, you can see that if you just put a whole bunch of money in at the beginning of 2008, it took 4 years just to get back to even. Whereas if you dollar cost averaged, and instead of lump sum invested, you make money kind of early on, and you continue to make money in a volatile market because you are buying more when the market is down. Lump sum investing is advantageous when the market just continues to go up. And I know we've had a pretty long bull run, and perhaps there's some volatility right now. No one really knows what's going to happen in the market, but if the market is just going to continue to go up, then just put it in and let it ride. The reality is that we're all going to do a combination of this. When you get your monthly or biweekly paycheck, you're going to hopefully just automate your savings and just inject money into your savings and into the market every month or so. But then let's say you get a bonus or another windfall, you'll do some lump sum investing as well. So the reality is we're going to do a combination of lump sum investing and dollar cost averaging. But I would think that for most of us, the bulk of our investing will be dollar cost averaged because we're going to be injecting and investing every month as we get our paychecks. What I would encourage you to consider doing, even early in your careers, is sort of setting up a connection between your bank account, your checking account, and your brokerage account. So you can go to Fidelity or Vanguard or whatever your favorite brokerage firm is, and you can set up this link, and you can set it up where there's automatic investments every month, let's say. And even if you're a resident and don't have too much excess cash, you could put in $50 a month just to kind of set it up and get used to it, and just put that money into a total stock market index fund, and just kind of get into the practice of doing that. And that way, when your salary increases, all you have to do is increase the amount that's injected every month. The nice thing about automating your investments is it takes the emotion out of investing, and you want to pay yourself first. One important thing that we see this regularly in the market is that if people start selling, the market goes down, and if the market goes down, people start selling. So there is this sort of symbiotic relationship between the value of the stock market and what people's psychology is and what their behavior is. If you look at 2008, 2009, you can see there was massive selling and the market went way down. But in reality, we should go against our gut feeling, and we should be buying when others are selling. And conversely, we should be selling when others are buying. And when you automate your investments, you just take the emotion out of it. Every month it's just going to happen, and you can just maybe keep one eye on the market, but you don't have to worry about whether you should sell or where you should buy. It's going to do it for you automatically. I'm a big believer in index funds, just keeping it simple and keeping it diversified. Index funds will typically outperform actively managed funds the majority of the time. And certainly the more you pay in commissions and fees, the less you get to keep. So investing in a very low cost or no cost total stock market index fund is a really smart way to go. One other thing that I'm just going to mention, I'm not going to go into great detail, is sometimes there will be a down market, and that's okay. It gives you the opportunity to tax loss harvest. And all that means is that you'll exchange one fund for a very similar fund and just harvest that loss. And then you can use that loss to offset some of your income and save money on taxes, or to offset future profits and save money on taxes. It's just, I'm not going to go into great detail on how this works, but tax loss harvesting is just something to think about in a down market to try to make lemonade out of lemons, I guess. And the last big thing we'll talk about is diversification and asset allocation. There are many different assets out there, from stocks to real estate to bonds to cash. And in any given year, some assets will do great and some assets will do poorly. You can see on this graph that in 2004, real estate did great. They were at the top at 38% in terms of return. But then in 2008, they tanked at negative 48%. Likewise, stocks can have a bad year. In 2008, they were down 37%. And in other years, in 2013, they were up 32%. So the point is to just have a diversified portfolio. It'll even out the ride. There won't be as many ups and downs, and it'll hopefully allow you to sleep a little bit better at night. And certainly as you get closer to retirement, you want to lose less. And you want to just become more conservative. What we talked about before, life is a soccer game. You want to play offense and defense, but when you've run up the score and you're towards retirement, you want to play defense and you want to not lose the money that has grown over your careers. You can diversify over different asset classes like stocks and bonds, but you can also diversify over different markets like domestic and international markets. And then certainly you'll diversify over time, and that's where dollar cost averaging comes in. I think, as I mentioned, you certainly want to be more conservative as you get closer to retirement, and as you're going to end up needing that money. Just an example portfolio when you're young, in your 30s and 40s, is to maybe consider a total stock market index fund. Vanguard is the pioneer of index funds. It has a very low expense ratio. Fidelity and others also have great index funds. And so maybe do 90% in a total stock market index fund, and then 10% in either a total bond fund or I live in Massachusetts, so maybe I do a Massachusetts tax exempt fund, so I don't have to pay state taxes on it. But that's just an example of how to keep it very simple and cheap. You're very diversified. As you get older, you'll see that you're going to want to consider becoming even more and more conservative. And so what that means in the simple two-fund portfolio, rather, is that you'll allocate more towards bonds and less towards stocks. And you want to periodically rebalance. So maybe every year, if stocks are running away, you might want to kind of shift a little bit more money into bonds just by shifting how much you're investing in bonds and stocks every month, and that'll steer the ship. But that's what all that rebalancing means. It kind of forces you to buy when things are low and maybe sell when things are high in a tax advantage account. The other thing to consider is that there's different tax efficiencies on the different funds and bonds that we're able to invest in. So let's say you're investing in REITs, real estate investment trusts, which I think are great, and they're a nice way to diversify from just stocks and bonds. They're not terribly tax efficient. So you might want to consider putting REITs in your retirement account, like your 401k or your Roth IRA, so that way you don't have to worry about the taxes on that. If you put it in your regular brokerage account, you're just going to have to be prepared that you're going to have to be paying a little bit more taxes on that than you would with something like a municipal bond, which is typically not taxed. If all this sounds really overwhelming and you don't want to allocate your assets yourself, you can either consider a life cycle fund or a life strategy fund. These are funds that help you become more conservative as you get closer to retirement. There are some really wonderful robo-investors out there like Wealthfront and Betterment that will also do this for you. They also help you with tax loss harvesting. A few pitfalls to avoid before we wrap up here is it's not always possible. And I think about 50% of docs end up leaving their first job. But if you get lucky and if you end up picking a job that you love and one that you can grow with throughout your career, great. But try your best to try to make a good decision early on and try to keep that one job. There's certainly costs associated with transitioning. There are many, many good reasons to switch to other jobs, geographical reasons, financial reasons, whatever it may be, personal reasons. But if you can, try to get one job and try to stick with it if possible. As mentioned, try not to carry high interest debt. Try not to lose patience or get bored. Really, the tortoise does win here. If you just practice medicine, do what you love, steadily invest, and be consistent and disciplined about it, you're going to do fine, and you'll be financially independent before you know it. Try to avoid high downside investments. A lot of folks will come to you to look for angel investment money. And sometimes that can really kill it and do great, and it'll give you a huge return. But oftentimes there can be a pretty high downside. And you guys have already won the game as long as you kind of slow and steady, kind of stick to the formula and regularly invest. You're going to win the game. You don't necessarily need to take tremendous risk here. Consider not overpaying or paying someone at all to do your financial planning. I think it just takes a few tools and some knowledge to do your own financial planning. Certainly, if you feel more comfortable having a financial advisor, please use one. It's better to have a financial advisor than just to have money sitting in a savings account making no interest. Don't ignore the business of medicine. Try to learn it. Try to learn how your practice overhead works and how reimbursement works, et cetera. And actually, do financial planning. A lot of people will read about it, attend a lecture, but they won't necessarily take action. I'd encourage you to take action and actually participate and do financial planning here. Grateful for your attention, and thank you for inviting me to give this talk. We're going to open up the floor for questions. My email address is on the screen. If there are any questions that I can help with, please feel free to contact me directly.
Dr. Shah, thank you so much for this great talk. A few questions. So when you mention or when you recommend that we should save at least 20% of our gross total income, do you mean, does it include both taxable and non-taxable savings? Or, for example, the down payments that we make for a house? I understand that part of it is going to be an interest payment, but for example, do that count, or what exactly do you mean by the 20%?
Yeah, great question. So the 20% is the whole kit and caboodle, right? So it's all your taxable investing and your tax deferred or tax advantaged investing. So the money that you put into your 401k, that counts. The money that you put into the backdoor Roth IRA conversion, that counts. The money that you put into 529 for college savings, that counts. And then certainly, whatever's left, you're going to probably put in, at least some of it into an index fund, total stock market index fund, probably. And that counts. So that's what I would say. That 20% is getting distributed between these various vehicles. But you want the totality of all those contributions to be 20% or more.
I see. Thank you so much. And another question, to what extent does personal umbrella policy cover occupational liability?
It doesn't, to my knowledge, it doesn't cover occupational liability at all. All of you hopefully already have malpractice insurance through your employer. And so that should already be in place. So occupational liability or malpractice liability should already be in place, and that's a completely separate policy. But I guess, let's say that someone at work sues you for libel. Let's say you say something bad, or they accuse you of saying something bad about them, and they're like, I'm suing you for slander or libel. If you wrote or said something inappropriate about somebody, that would be personal liability, even though it happened in the workplace. And that would be, I believe, covered by your umbrella insurance policy. But if you had like a poor outcome in surgery or a poor outcome medically, then that would be malpractice.
I see. Another question is, for physicians and especially non-surgical specialties, sometimes there could be a resistance on signing up for a disability insurance early on. And what would be your recommendation for those with non-surgical specialties as well?
Yeah, no, I think we have to remember that medicine is very different than other fields. Once we stop working, we don't make money. Once you stop seeing patients, you don't get an income. There's no like safety net for physicians. And so disability insurance, and you will probably have a little bit of group disability insurance through your employer. It tends to be very minimal. But disability insurance, I think, is important for all physicians, surgical or medical, because things can happen. You can get cancer and not be able to practice medicine, internal medicine, or a medical profession that's non-surgical. You could get low back pain. You could get arthritis. There's many things that can happen that could render you disabled. And luckily the risk is low. But even if you're not surgical, you do want to protect that very big and important investment you made in your medical training. And our friends from college, they get their first job at 22, and they're making money for the decade that you're in med school and training. And so there's also this time deficit that we have, because we have a decade less on average to really earn an attending salary. So I think it's important for all physicians, no matter what specialty you're in. And then, as I mentioned before, as you get financially independent, then you can get rid of it and not have to pay that premium. But early in your career, especially, you don't want to get disabled and not have a safety net.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And then another question is, which of these assets are interest-free? I believe they're talking about the saving methods that you mentioned by saying assets, I believe.
Yeah. So do they mean interest-free or tax-free?
Interest-free, it says.
Well, I would encourage you not to invest in something that's interest-free, right? That's like putting money under your mattress. And
I'm not sure how it is possible.
Right. Yeah. And remember that every penny you have under your mattress is actually losing like 6% a year, because inflation is so crazy right now. So you want to at least try to stay up with inflation if you can. But in terms of tax-free, I'm going to alter the question in case that's what the question, what the person meant. In terms of tax-free assets, municipal bond funds are tax-free. And so I personally love municipal bond funds, or doing like a municipal bond ladder, where you, instead of buying a fund, you buy the individual bonds and they mature rather at different times. And if you hold that bond to maturity, you don't lose any of your principal, and you just get the, 2, 3, 4% annual dividend from that bond in a tax-free manner. So I'm a big fan of municipal bond funds or municipal bond ladders to get some tax-free income. And in fact, a lot of people in retirement, they'll put a lot of money into municipal bond ladders, and then they'll receive a paycheck every year, basically, that's tax-free from the dividends off of that.
And then I guess we can ask one last question, which is, how can we do traditional IRA to Roth IRA? So that way, is it going to be tax deferred to tax free?
So it's actually not terribly hard to do. I actually just did mine. I have a Fidelity account and a Vanguard account. So I did it on my Fidelity account, and when you're linked between your bank account and your Fidelity account, you can just move $6,000 into your traditional IRA. And then there's a button click saying convert, traditional IRA to backdoor Roth IRA. You've already paid taxes on it, right? This is coming out of your checking account. So you've already paid taxes on it. And so that $6,000 can get legally converted through the back door into a Roth IRA. And then it grows without ever getting taxed again.
Gotcha. Thank you. I think we have another, time for another question. So actually, this is a question from me. I was recently reading some statistics about the gender inequality among physicians in terms of income. Do you think, is it just the salary? It's hard to believe that it is just the salary. I mean, we must be doing some other things wrong as women physicians, that our total worth is much less than a male colleague 10, 20 years from now. So what would be your advice to women physicians to do differently than what we have been doing, so that we can at least get an equal share compared to our male colleagues?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think it's tragic that not just in medicine, but professional soccer, business, law, like in almost every field, I think there's this difference between what men make and what women make, and it's simply not fair. My primary care doctor is a woman, and I think she should be getting paid a ton because she's awesome. But so first of all, I don't think it's fair, and I think that this is sort of it's a big question, and maybe beyond the scope of financial planning, but. I don't think women are doing anything wrong, honestly. I think they're doing everything right. And if I'm not mistaken, I think that at least in my alma mater, in my medical school, the number of women medical students outnumber the number of men medical students, which I think is pretty amazing. But I think women are doing everything right. I think that there are systemic reasons and flaws within our culture as to why, and within our society as to why women in many, many fields don't make quite as much as men. And I think it's complicated. I think that we need to continue to fight that fight and try to achieve gender equality in terms of pay in every single field beyond medicine. But I think it speaks even more to the importance of financial planning, right? So if your salary is less because of these cultural and systemic wrongdoings, in my opinion, it's even more important to try to invest and grow early on. So that way, you'll hopefully your nest egg will grow more robustly than your male counterparts, in the sense that if you're saving more, you'll end up snowballing more.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shah. This was very helpful. I really thank you for joining us today and educating on this very, very important topic. I think we can end the talk at this point. It's 6 p.m. Again, thank you so much. And I hope our audience have found this helpful.
Thank you for inviting me. I enjoyed it. Thank you.